Oh, thanks for that intro music today, Chris.
I'm really tired.
He's really tired. That music sounded tired. Hi, everybody. It's Saturday, June 13th. This is my 8th show that I've done, and glad for those who can join us today or watch it later or watch it on my YouTube channel, One Sweet Bite by Amanda. So make sure to check that out.
What's that channel again?
That channel again is One Sweet Bite by Amanda. And I have all my videos there, so it's probably easier if you don't get to watch it right when I'm doing it live. Sometimes it's easier to watch it there because you don't have to scroll through my feed to try to find them. So, today we are making brown butter toffee chocolate chip cookies. Recipe is by Appetit, and it's one of my favorite cookies ever. I made it and I love it. So, first things first, before we even get to any of the ingredients, we're going to start with our brown butter, because brown butter needs to cool a little bit before we start to mix everything. So we're going to be taking 2 sticks of butter, which I have in a saucepan, and we're going to be going to the stove.
Where?
To start to cook the brown butter. So, if you haven't cooked brown butter before, don't be scared. We have it on like a medium, not really low, not really high. And you're gonna cook it in a skillet. You can cook it in a saucepan if you want. A lot of when I was trying to just teach myself how to make it, fall over. A lot of the chefs out there use a skillet because you can keep an eye on it better. So we're going to do it in the skillet today. And so here I have my 2 sticks of unsalted butter. Again, I'm doing the unsalted butter because, question, anybody know? Because we don't want to adjust the salt in our cookies. So we're just letting the butter melt. I had taken this butter out a little while ago and let it start to get to room temperature. You don't have to do that, but I figured it would kind of help get it to melt a little bit faster so that you're just not watching butter melt. And brown butter is kind of a new rage out there in the baking world and in the cooking world. When I was starting out, I didn't ever hear about brown butter, but now it's really been coming up in a lot of different recipes. And brown butter basically is just butter that you're cooking, and you're developing the milk solids from the butter. And so what's tricky about it though is that it's very easy to burn it. So that's why you don't just stick your 2 sticks of butter and walk away and start doing everything else. You stay here, you watch it, and you keep an eye on it, because it's very easy for it to burn just like that. So,
what temperature for those who just joined? Maybe what do you have the stove at?
I don't have my stove on yet because
the range
is on. It's about medium. It's not low. It's not high. It's just about medium, because you don't want to cook it really fast, because then it can get away from you too quickly. So you want to just kind of do it in a gentle motion of letting it do its thing. So we see it's almost completely melted. There's still a couple little chunks. And you see that the butter is starting to develop the foam. And that's what it's just going to do. And I'm going to turn this down just a tad. And so you can see that it's going to start. You can hear it. I don't know if you can get close enough, Chris, to... Do you hear that little crackling sound? I don't know if you can hear it on there yet. Soon you're going to hear it pretty loud. And this is good. This is all what it needs to do. I have a heat-proof spatula that I'm using here. And you all may be wondering, well, what are you doing? It's just sitting there and it's, you know, it's all foamy. That's okay. This is what it needs to do. And brown butter really gives whatever you're baking or if you're cooking a really nice nutty flavor. It's like butter times 10. And it's really good. Once you make something with brown butter, I've made carrots with it before, like roasted carrots. See, so now it's starting to really get its crackling. And it's bubbling, boiling. This is very hot. It's very hot, so you don't want to have your kids necessarily doing this part of it. Because this is just like if you had a pot of hot boiling water. This is hot boiling butter. You see, I'm just kind of stirring it, not vigorously, but I'm going to the bottom and getting anything that's starting to cook on the bottom, which would be our milk solids, and lifting those from the bottom of the pan. And you can see, as I move some of this foam out of the way, that the color is getting a little bit darker. And I'm going to do my waft of smelling. I do that a lot, because you do really get an indication of where you are with what you're cooking. And I smell that it still just really smells like butter. And what you're looking for is for it to have, they always describe it as a nutty smell, a nutty flavor, and almost like if you're, what can I say? You know, if you're cooking marshmallows over a flame, and before they get all burnt crisp, there's like a scent to it. It's, I don't know. I'm not helping with my description. I'm sorry.
I understand what you're saying.
So we see now this foam is starting to dissipate. We have all of our bubbling action going on. And this is a little process. I mean, it's going to take a good 5 to 8 minutes usually. Hopefully Chris won't get tired of holding that camera right above this pan.
Does it turn brown?
It will. Now, we want it like a golden, because you can tell, can't you, that it's a different color now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you just want to be careful. Again, do not walk away from the stove. This is very important. Don't say, oh, well, I can leave that there for a second and I'll go do something else at this point. You don't want to do that, because then you've wasted 2 sticks of butter, it will burn and it will stink and you have to start all over again. Who wants that? So, and I'm going to put the heat up just a little at this point. This is kind of like when you're, well, when you're making something, like if you're doing a pastry cream, for example, you put it back in a pot and you cook it till it gets thick. And there's this moment where it's not really doing what you need it to do, but then all of a sudden it will come together. So we see here all this brown in there.
Yeah, I can see it on the outside. I don't know if people can see it.
So, I'm going to take this off, and I'm going to pour it. See now, you can see all that brown, and I'm going to try to reach my spatula, because this is what's really important. That's all that brown butter flavor right there.
And you don't want to keep it in the pan, right?
No.
Right.
You do not want to keep it in the, because
cook.
it would continue to cook and burn. And so now, trying to, well, and can you smell that, Chris? If you take like a whiff, it has like a nutty smell to it.
It almost smells like caramel corn.
Yes, exactly. So I'll go ahead and unlock my KitchenAid and put our bowl in here. And so we're just gonna let that sit so it can cool a little bit. Because it's really hot. What you don't want to do, it's really hot. You don't want to all of a sudden add eggs to this. Because what would you have? You'd have some scrambled eggs. So we want it to sit for a little bit. So we'll go over our ingredients. If anybody's watching today and has any questions, now will be a very good time to ask questions because I'll have a little time to wait. So, the ingredients for these cookies are 1 cup of packed dark brown sugar. And the thing with the dark brown sugar, so that's a heavier, it's got more molasses. That's how brown sugar is made. It's molasses that's added to the sugar. And so this is a dark brown, and that's also what helps these cookies have a very rich, just really good flavor. It's different than a typical cookie. It's got just like a really deep, rich flavor to them. So that's what helps is this dark brown sugar. Here we have, this is 1/3 cup of regular sugar. We have 2 large eggs, and I've had these room temperature. I probably took these out, I'd say around noon. So they've been out about an hour or so they're nice and room temperature. And we have 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Our dry ingredients here, and you can all see I have my ingredients all written out because I have this recipe on my phone and there'd be no way I could see it. So here we have our 2 cups of all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour is really what you're going to use for your everyday recipes, unless you have a recipe that specifically asks for self-rising flour or cake flour. You're always going to go with the all-purpose flour. I try to get the organic. I try to buy all organic ingredients as much as possible, just so that you don't have as many chemicals added to things. But whatever flour you can get your hands on nowadays is what I'd suggest. Another thing with the all-purpose flour, I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but you don't want it to be bleached. So you'll do the unbleached all-purpose flour. So that's our 2 cups. And here I'm going to add, so this is 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And then in here we have 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And I'm gonna go ahead, like I usually do, is just give that a good whisk so it's all incorporated well. And then the good parts of this cookie today, here we have, this is 2 Heath bars chopped up. If you can't find Heath bars, you could also use Score bars. Now here in Texas, at our grocery store, H-E-B, Heath bars are not sold at the checkout. So what I usually have to do is buy, it's a bag of individual little Heath bars, and I'll use usually 8 of those, and I'll chop them up for this recipe. Luckily, Chris was able to find Heath bars at a Target. So if you can't find the regular size, you can use the minis. I'll use about 8. And just chop them up, you know, small little pieces is good. Again, if you can find Score bars, use Score. I don't know if they even sell that here. I don't know if I've seen those. And then our chocolate.
S-K-O-R.
S-K-O-R.
Yeah,
Not Score like basketball score. And then in here we have, this is about 1.5 to 1 3/4 of a cup of chocolate, semi-sweet chocolate that's been chopped. I decided to use chopped chocolate today instead of chips, because this recipe by Bon Appetit, they actually use in theirs what's called chocolate wafers. And a few episodes back when I was making the biscotti, and I dipped the biscotti in the melted chocolate, I used wafers. Now that's a different kind of wafer. That's a melting wafer, and so that's going to have different preservatives and different additives put into it to help it melt. And it has other ingredients in it besides just a regular baking wafer. So there's a difference. And wafers to bake with are kind of hard to find. You can get them online. King Arthur Flour has them. Other baking companies online would have them. I've never been able to find them in H-E-B or Central Market. But basically they're just a circular disc, and the way they melt really nice because chips have a additive put into them so that they hold their shape, whereas a wafer does not, so then it just kind of melts and oozes. And that's similar to what the chunks will do. So that's why I chose to go with the chunks. No problem to use chips if that's all you can find, or if that's what you have on hand. Like I say, the only thing that's different about chips is that they do have something in them so they don't lose their shape. And you'll notice that later on, after a cookie has cooled, you basically can open it and the chip will just kind of be in its shape still. It will still melt, but it doesn't kind of spread a little bit in the cookie. So that's just something to think about, if you are going to make these sometime. I always like the chunks, but anyway, I digress. So, and then finally we have our flaked sea salt. This is the Malden sea salt. This is what we're going to put on right before they go in the oven. And the sea salt is also something that's kind of really just been the rage lately, like the brown butter. The sea salt has come into everything the last few years. You see everything with like caramel and sea salt, chocolate and sea salt. It really does bring out the flavor of chocolate, and it just gives it a nice little hint of salt that really adds to the cookie. Okay, so we're gonna go back here, and you can kind of see, Chris, if you want to look in there, how dark that is. See all those milk solids at the bottom? That's what we're looking for, is that nice dark color. And that's a good brown butter right there. And those milk solids that have cooked really add such a good flavor to these cookies. Okay. So before I start, I'm going to still talk a little bit more. And what you're going to need today is also sheet pans lined with parchment. I'm going to be using a cookie scoop that's about 1.5 tablespoons. You can use any size you want. Just remember, these cookies will spread, and so you don't want to use anything that's going to be too big or put them too close together on your sheet pan. I don't recall what the oven will be. I believe it's going to be at 350, which is usually always what it is.
We'll check.
But we'll check and give you the exact temperature. I apologize that I didn't write that down. It's because I don't have my oven on right now. Because one thing about these cookies is, because we're not going from a creamed butter consistency, we're going from a melted butter consistency, that's where we're starting. Once we add our flour and then our chips and our toffee, we're going to need to let this dough sit for at least a half an hour at room temperature. And what that's going to do is let the flour absorb into the whole mixture. Because if you were to bake them just right after you put the mixture together, they may just spread too much and not develop well as a cookie. Basically, we need to let the flour absorb it because it's starting with the melted butter. So that's why I don't have my oven on just yet. So we're going to make this dough, and then once it comes together, just let it sit at room temperature. And then when we come back, I will have already put a tray into the oven, but I'll be scooping some out and putting some salt on to show you how they look going into the oven, but then I'll be able to show you how they look coming out. That's my plan. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll get started with this. So we have our butter, and we're gonna add our brown sugar and our white sugar. And I'm just gonna start it on low for a second.
It smells good already.
Yeah, it really makes a difference. It does. It has that caramely smell to it. And so then I'm gonna make sure that this all gets incorporated really well. And as you're kind of mixing this here, it kind of does help it cool down a little bit. You can see that dark brown sugar really kind of keeps in the caramel flavor. It keeps these cookies a little bit darker. And I'm going to go ahead and just always scrape. Okay.
The camera doesn't pick up how dark that is. It sort of shows it a little lighter on the video, I think.
Oh.
Interesting.
Yes. It's dark. It's almost, I'd say, as dark, about a shade or two lighter than vanilla.
Yeah, almost looks like chocolate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so now we're going to add our, and at this point I will remind you, it's very important that your eggs are room temperature because this is still pretty warm. And you don't want to all of a sudden add a very cold egg to something warm. That won't be a good situation. So we're going to add one of our eggs. Let it mix in a little. And then our other egg. I like to get it broken up a little bit. Add our vanilla. And then we're going to increase our speed. And we're going to now let this mix for at least a minute or so. What we're looking for is for it to actually lighten up a little bit. And you can see it already is doing that. In the recipe it calls for mixing this part at about a minute or so. We just want it to be very incorporated well. And let those eggs feed in pretty well. And so it's lightening up, getting a little bit thicker. And then once we have that at our right consistency, we're starting to incorporate our flour mixture. And again, I'm always using a little spoon or cup to help add the flour instead of just pouring it all in and causing a mess. And then you're also really not putting all of your ingredients in because it's flying out all over the place. So you can see that this is a nice golden color. It's definitely taken on a different color, different texture. So I'm going to slow this down. Now I'm going to do a scrape of my bottom of my bowl, excuse me, because I like to make sure everything is incorporated well. Okay. Make sure that's hot. Okay. So now we're going to add our flour. And again, when I'm just adding it with this little scooper, it works out perfectly because I can kind of just keep going in a nice rhythm. Not pouring too much. Okay, so we have that all mixed in. And you'll see it's a very loose dough. And again, that's why we're going to end up letting this sit. So I'm going to scrape off my paddle attachment. Make sure I get all that wonderful dough off of there. The smell is so good. I wish I had smell-o-vision for all of you viewers out there. It almost has a consistency of caramel too. Like if you look at it, it's really an interesting dough. And so we're going to stir in by hand our toffee chips. Make sure you get all that. And our chocolate. And so whenever you're stirring your ingredients in, you want to make sure to go around your bowl, and then you do all the way to the bottom and up, folding it in so that it all gets incorporated really well. So I go around, up through the bottom so that I'm getting in that little well, divot, whatever, of the bottom of the bowl. All right, that looks pretty well incorporated, but you see it's very loose right now. So if we were to try to scoop these and bake them, they'd just be spread all over in a mess.
So does it get chilled, or we just let it sit?
We just let it sit room temperature for 30 minutes. So it's 1:30. So at 2 o'clock, I'm going to start to scoop these, and I'll put one tray in, and then we'll come back right before that tray is going to come out, and we'll show you I'm scooping and putting on the salt. Alrighty, see you in 30 minutes. Thanks.